everyone, and a happy Memorial Day weekend to y'all. This is episode number 12 of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with your host, Kenneth the K-Rock Klein. Yes, I'm Kenneth the K-Rock Klein, and boys and girls of all ages, well, depending on what you are, we're back for another exciting episode, and we got a good show for you today. Today, I'm going to be talking about my thoughts on Caitlin Clark and her transition to the WNBA, and also the heat that she has been generating for people that might feel that she's only getting the coverage because of some favoritisms and other issues and some sorts. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of confusing when you think about it, because Caitlin Clark has, she's still transitioning to the WNBA, and she's still kind of learning the ropes of the game. I mean, we're seeing a bunch of hard fouls towards her, and there's this expectation that she's supposed to be this incredible face, but look, she's a rookie. I'm going to get more into detail of all the criticisms that she faced and why I think it's absolutely ridiculous to criticize her at this point. Then I'm going to be talking about a fun subject. I know we're still like 9 Sundays away as of this podcast. We're 9 Sundays away from the opening week of the NFL season. And I know there was one comment that was made by Nick Caserio about a month or so ago that it's football season. And technically it still is, even though there isn't a game that's going to be played until September. But what I wanted to do was do a random experiment where I take all 32 teams, I divide them up by the conferences, and then I match them up randomly to make like a hypothetical Super Bowl matchup, and then I would rank all those matchups from the least fun to the most exciting and the most hyped up. And I did that a while back, and you guys are not going to believe what list I came up with. So we're going to do that after the first segment. But before I talk about all those things, I want to bring up an interesting story that I've noticed. Now, college baseball is entering its postseason mark, and you have teams that are in conference tournaments, and you have teams in lower level conferences that are competing for spots in the College World Series in particular. But there is a story that really captured me, and this makes me back to my time at East Texas Baptist University when I was assistant sports information director there. So East Texas Baptist University is a Division III college, and we played small level schools like Laterno, Mary Hardin Baylor, Hardin Simmons, University of Texas at Dallas, or places that you probably have never heard about, or maybe have if you're listening and are alumni of those schools. But I also remember the teams that we played not in our conference. I remember Centenary, I remember Schreiner University, Trinity, just a couple of names of schools that we played off. But one school that I only remember playing for softball was Birmingham Southern College, and I was surprised when I learned about this story because I hadn't been on the D3 level in 3 years, but I was very surprised when I first learned about this story. But this involves Birmingham Southern's baseball team, and back in March, Birmingham Southern announced that it was going to be closing at the end of this month for reasons including financial shortfalls and declining enrollment. And when I saw that, I was completely shocked. I obviously know that it's hard, like when you have, in order for you to be a successful college, you need to have the finances and you need to have improved enrollment of classes. But I was kind of shocked when I saw that there weren't that many students going. But looking at their enrollment, I see that they had at least 975 undergraduates, and that's kind of, surprising, especially for a school that's located in Birmingham, Alabama. But yeah, Birmingham Southern College is going to be closing, but their baseball team is making an inspired run. This is kind of like the movie The Final Season. Like, it's a sports movie. If you haven't seen that movie, Sean Astin, who is best known for playing Rudy in the Goonies and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, he's in that movie, along with Powers Booth, Rachel Lee Cook, Tom Arnold, and Michael Angaranato, or I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name. I apologize to him as well. And even the guy that actually used to be the manager, James Gammon, that's who it was. Even the manager from the Major League movies is in that movie. But the story of that movie is it involves a powerhouse high school baseball team that had won a lot of state championships in Iowa. And unfortunately, they were a small school, and because of the issues with, a lot of small schools closing down so they can merge with the bigger schools, Norway High School, the team that was involved in this movie, was going to be closed down. And so they have this one last year where they go out there and they try to win a historic 20th state championship for their last season in 1991. So it is an interesting movie, and I do recommend that y'all check it out if you're able to find it. But going back to this story, Birmingham Southern, they had just found out a couple months ago that their school was going to be closing by the end of this month. So that means that their last game would be in the Super Regionals, and they were taking on Denison. And this game, or the first game they won, they won 10-1, and then they beat Denison University in Granville, Ohio, by the final of 7-6. And one of the players actually on that team is Drake LaRoche, who was the son of former MLB slugger Adam LaRoche, so a guy that I do remember from his time in Major League Baseball. But it was real surprising to see that Birmingham Southern will be going to the College World Series as the only school of all the teams participating that doesn't even have a college that currently is in existence. And it's real stunning, and it's real devastating to see that, because yes, this is going to be their last year, and no matter, regardless of what happens, they won't be able to go back to school at Birmingham Southern unless they graduated already. But for all the students there, they have to find a new place to go to class and transfer to. That's definitely hard, and I do feel bad for Birmingham Southern. But because my alma mater, East Texas Baptist University, well, I say my alma mater, but it's not really my alma mater. It's a place where I got my master's degree in. But because East Texas Baptist University's baseball team unfortunately failed to qualify for the postseason, I'm going to be rooting for Birmingham Southern to win the College World Series in the Division III level, because I would think it would be a great story for them to head all the way to the NCAA tournament in their last season as a program and win the national championship. They may not have won, or they may not have a chance to defend, but you know what? That would be a remarkable achievement. And it's so inspiring just to see that story. So I'm definitely going to be rooting for the Panthers of Birmingham Southern College. Go get them, boys. Win it for your community and for all those fans, and you will definitely make some history if you do. And speaking of history, we're going to be talking about Caitlin Clark up next. Stay tuned. '97 was the very first year that the WNBA came out. And as someone that was 6 years old then, I really wasn't a diehard fan of it, but I was proud and lucky to admit that I was a fan of the Houston Comets, who at that time were the first, and in my personal opinion, still the only WNBA dynasty that has ever been produced. I mean, when you have stars like Cynthia Cooper, Cheryl Swoops, and Tina Thompson all on the same floor, the big three, they did what the Buffalo Bills of the 1990s couldn't do, and that was win all 4 consecutive championship appearances, a mark that has never been topped or matched in the WNBA landscape. And the Comets back then were like the Chicago Bulls of the 1990s. But since the Comets have folded back in 2008, I want to say, the WNBA has kind of lost its luster. And I'm not saying that the talent isn't there. There are some good players for the WNBA. There were players that have tried really hard to make the WNBA as impactful as possible. But for whatever reason, the fan base has not been very exciting, or they haven't really been interested in. There's been a decline in viewership. And you don't really know what the deal is here, because back then it was either, well, the NBA was still the NBA because you had LeBron James, you had Steph Curry and the Warriors, you had Kobe, and obviously Kobe Bryant before he passed, I think I heard somewhere he was trying to make women's basketball more fun and popular to watch. And I think he would have done a great job if that had been the case, but we'll never know for sure. But, you think about the WNBA and their situation, they have just been lacking viewership. Now, some people have, of course, accused politics, being that women talk about wanting equal pay and the men, compared to the men. And I do think that there is a problem with that. I do think the gap between the men and the women being paid the way they are is ridiculous. I do think we need to close the gap. I don't think we're ever going to get equal pay, but ultimately, it is what it is, at this point. And unless things change, it's not going to be you're not going to make everyone happy. But the fans, whether it's with politics or whether it's just with the interest in the NBA or whether it's just with uninspiring play, they haven't really been taken to the WNBA. And then all of a sudden, here comes Caitlin Clark, player from Iowa, who in her last 2 seasons has led Iowa to the national championship game twice. And she is now the all-time leading scorer, male or female, in the history of college basketball. I'm telling you, Pete Maravich's record, yes, you could say Maravich only played 3 years because freshmen didn't play, or he didn't have the three-point line, and if he did, that record would have been astronomical to beat up. But regardless of what you say, the record is Caitlin Clark's. Both college players were great, but Clark is the all-time leading scorer, and that's the way it is, unless someone comes in and beats her record. But for the time being, Caitlin Clark is the most sought-after, or was the most sought-after college basketball player. And as a reward, she was the number 1 pick in the WNBA for the Indiana Fever. Now, her start to the WNBA has not been good. She was averaging like 17 points per game or so, and the Indiana Fever have gotten off to an 0-5 start. Now, they've since won their first game, which, as of this podcast, but Caitlin Clark has kind of been in the microscope in more ways than one. And that, unfortunately, is because she is the number 1 draft pick. She is expected to be the face of the franchise, the face of the WNBA, because the WNBA needs something. They needed a player, a marquee player, to help revive the league. I mean, the WNBA isn't dead, but it hasn't drawn a lot of interest. And yes, there have been some great players. Breanna Stewart, Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird, Brittany Griner, and I can think of all the list of those players. But they needed somebody to elevate themselves in the game. And Caitlin Clark is hoping to be that player. But the first month has not been too kind to Clark. Whether it was receiving all this negative treatment, whether it was from former players who are kind of a little jealous and upset, saying, why is it that she's getting all this attention when we have spent years and years trying to develop our game to try to make the WNBA watchable, and yet we can't do that. We're not getting that kind of treatment that Caitlin Clark is. Or whether it's because there's this public perception that, because Caitlin Clark happens to be a white player and a lot of people are taking interest to a sport, when basketball has been historically a black-dominated sport. It hasn't been an easy transition for Caitlin Clark. First of all, she's a rookie. She is going to have some struggles. That's just the way it goes for every rookie. And once you kind of get into a rhythm, that's when you could start to take off. But I think people have really put this high emphasis and high expectation for her to be successful right out of the gate, to save the WNBA. And yet, look, she's drawing a lot of attention. Look at how many people went to the New York Liberty game. New York City. They didn't go there just to see the Liberty. They went to see Caitlin Clark, the player that was supposed to take over this WNBA. And yet, the WNBA, there's still a level of maybe some jealousy, maybe of some, ability for trying to see if Caitlin Clark can really transition to this WNBA. That's why you're having all these players guard her really tight and defensively. Look, Michael Jordan was frozen out during 1985's All-Star game. because everyone knew he was supposed to be the heir apparent, and he was successful in overcoming the early challenges. You look at Steph Curry, the guy is a different kind of point guard, but yet he shoots the ball tremendously well. And, he's had to deal with some criticisms throughout his time in his early years, but now he has become arguably a top 10 player in the NBA. Maybe a top 5 point guard, if you will. But Caitlin Clark does have a following, and she knows it. This girl is a player that has true Midwest values about her. In fact, she almost reminds me of Larry Bird. Larry Bird, when he was in high school, he was a tremendous player, even though he played for a small town high school. He went to the university, or Indiana University, to play for Bobby Knight. But after a few days, he said, this isn't working. I couldn't stay. He couldn't stay there, so he ended up leaving. He didn't play basketball for a year until he finally went to a small town, Indiana State University, and he led them to the national championship. Now, Indiana was the bigger school in Indiana, but in today's comparison, that would be like if Caitlin Clark had decided to go play at UConn or go play at South Carolina, or, maybe I'm throwing this out there even though it's a long shot, but maybe a Baylor, or maybe go down to LSU to play with Coach Kim Mulkey. But Caitlin Clark chose to stay at Iowa because she's a Midwest girl, and she has turned that Iowa program into somewhat of a powerhouse. 2 straight national championships, of course. They could have won one of them, but it was hard, especially when you're running up into the juggernauts of LSU and South Carolina. But Caitlin Clark, even through her losses, has generated a lot of publicity. But sadly, she has generated a lot of criticisms. There are stories that the WNBA players are a little bit jealous that Caitlin Clark and her team are affording charter planes when years past they probably would be flying commercial. They are, some people are very upset because she happens to be a white player that has been dominating, and because of white privilege. I'm looking at you, Jamel Hill. I know what you said about her. And the criticism, it's absolutely ridiculous. And then the other thing that really bothers me is that, look, the WNBA, there are players in the league that happen to be homosexual. Caitlin Clark happens to have a boyfriend, and that's her choice. And people, I don't know, I don't want to come across as saying, well, the WNBA has this stereotype, but, there is a bad reputation, even if it isn't warranted, that most of the players, if not all players, happen to be dating women, and that's not fair. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with their players' choices. I think if you are a woman who likes a woman, then that's your choice. You should pursue that. But if you are a woman who likes a male, you should pursue that. But the WNBA shouldn't have this unfair stereotype. They shouldn't be critical of Caitlin Clark because she happens to be different in that she happens to have a boyfriend. Look, when you play, there were probably men and women who dated in the WNBA when it first started. Obviously, society has kind of shifted more towards we're trying to be as inclusive as possible, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the thing is, it should never matter what your sexual preference is, nor what race you are. Caitlin Clark can't help it if she happens to be white. And, it is what it is, But it shouldn't matter what sexual preference, what religion, what, your lifestyle is and all that. If you can play, then you deserve to be in the WNBA. And what Caitlin Clark is doing has to be helping the WNBA. But I just don't think the WNBA or fans of, I don't know if the players or the society that has vilified, the WNBA for different reasons, I don't think they're appreciating what Caitlin Clark is doing to the league. She is bringing new fans of the WNBA. She is bringing fans who stopped watching the WNBA after some time. She is bringing people that didn't even know what is exactly a WNBA player. All they knew was LeBron James and the rest of the NBA company. She's even bringing people that aren't fans of sports who are watching this, and they look at her and they say, oh my gosh, there's someone that looks like me that's doing all these remarkable things, and in this day and age, This is what needs to happen. Women's sports is suddenly taking over. Now, I'm not saying they're going to completely take over because you're still going to have the NBA, but they are drawing more interest. Or you're still going to have the NFL and all that, but they're drawing more interest. They are gaining a lot of popularity, and that's what I think they needed. But yet, when you have all these ridiculous claims, and comments about, oh, she's only getting, this because she's white. No, it's not. It's not that she's white. It's not that, she is, was on a team that could have won a national championship. She is bringing a lot to the game of basketball from her hometown. Again, she could have gone to a big school and have the same impact, but she has done it at a place that, with all due respect to Iowa, it was never really much of a basketball powerhouse. In fact, football is still a popular sport there. But what Caitlin Clark did at the University of Iowa, and what she has generated because of that, that's the reason why she's on there. And of course, the biggest thing of all, she can play. She's got great basketball IQ. She can shoot from downtown. She can go inside. She's doing things that nobody has ever seen, like any other women's basketball player have played. I mean, there have been some that have done that, but she's done it at a level that you couldn't even imagine anyone else doing it. Of course, the stats right now, she hasn't quite hit her shots. She's, averaging 17 points per game. Again, it's the same thing. She is trying really hard, to make a transition to WNBA, and I think she will. She will be a scorer. Of course, all these comments from former WNBA players, I don't think it's a case of jealousy, but if it is, then there's something wrong. You have wanted the WNBA to thrive for such a while. And I'm sure you wanted every player to succeed to make the WNBA just as good and more recognizable, than the NBA or even the NFL. But yet, you can't, you don't seem to have an appreciation for Caitlin Clark. And I hope that changes. But then, of course, you got to remember that Caitlin Clark is human. I picked up an article, and she was real honest about her first month. The one quote that stands out to me is this: honestly, I feel like to the media, I talk to them more than I get to talk to my own family, which is really kind of sad in a way. It's a lot for somebody that's 22 years old. It can be tough at times. That should be relatable, because I know that the media, and they're obviously trying to cover Caitlin Clark as much as possible, but yet it's really unfair when you have a player that is trying to make an impact in the WNBA, and you have all these different criticisms, whether it's from people that are trying to find some excuses that has nothing to do with their talent, or whether it's from former players who may or may not be jealous of Caitlin Clark's success. And I don't think that's the case. I think the WNBA wants to succeed. I'm not saying that all these players hate Caitlin Clark. I just think their frustration is, why didn't we get the coverage when we were trying to do the same thing that she was doing? There just is that something that is there, like with Caitlin Clark. And I think ultimately she's going to go down as one of the all-time greatest players to play in the WNBA and be one of the biggest impacts. With women's athletes like Serena Williams, or, whether you like them or hate them, the United States women's soccer team, it's a big deal. And it's just kind of sad that we have to put so much emphasis and criticism to her. But I think if you're a hater, you're a loser. I think if you are hating Caitlin Clark because of what she's doing, or because you have these expectations and maybe there's a sense of jealousy, I got news for you. You got a shallow life. I mean, sure, I would hate it if Caitlin Clark, if I had a WNBA team to root for, and if Caitlin Clark happened to hit a shot that would beat my game, I would be so, God dang it, why did you have to hit that shot? But that's just who she is. She's an unbelievable talented player. And yet, we got people that aren't really appreciating what the WNBA is going to be for people like her. And it's not just with Caitlin Clark. It's with other players. I know Angel Reese is trying really hard to also say, look, it's not just about her. It's about me. It's about all these other players that came into the WNBA. But you got to have a leader. You got to have a focal point. You got to have someone to carry the torch. Michael Jordan was that leader in the NBA. LeBron James is that leader in the NBA. He may not have that ring for long, but he still is a leader in the NBA, even if you don't like it. The WNBA needed a focal point. They needed someone to be the leader. And they are putting the homage on this 22-year-old girl from Iowa that is looking to be considered an all-time great. And I know Indiana is off to a slow start, but time will get them better. They should be a threat to win WNBA championships with Caitlin Clark at the helm. This is her rookie season. Take it easy. Let her develop. It's a big gap between the pros and college games. Every rookie goes through that. If you can't accept that, if you can't have the ability to wait, and if you want to just start criticizing Caitlin Clark, then I'm sorry. You have no respect from me. But I do want Caitlin Clark to succeed, and I do want her to be an outstanding player. And I think it's unfair when you have people like Jemele Hill and people from The View saying all these things just to try to politicize things. Look, this is not a political issue, okay? Stop trying to politicize things. And I don't care if I'm not a left guy or a right guy. I just don't think it's fair that we have to politicize everything. Let her play. Let her try to work herself to develop into that player that fans want her to be. Let her continue to draw interest. Because trust me, WNBA, you needed this interest for a while, and you're getting it. At the end of the day, she is doing a good thing for the WNBA by bringing in all this attention. So that's just kind of my thoughts on that whole deal. But moving right along, we are going to be talking about the NFL and the matchups that I think would be interesting for a Super Bowl matchup for this upcoming season. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. So now we are moving on to my second segment, and I kind of want to do something a little fun for this one. Now, I know that we are only 9 Sundays away from the start of NFL season, but I mean, there's a lot of people that are already making their early Super Bowl predictions, their season schedule predictions, and who they think is going to participate in the big game, but I kind of want to do something a little different. So I was thinking, instead of having a Super Bowl prediction, what if I did a countdown of the worst to best Super Bowl matchups for the season? And to be quite honest, I didn't want to do like where you have one team that has multiple Super Bowl opponents. I wanted to pair up all 32 teams with each other and rank them as far as who I think would be the worst matchup to who I think would be the best matchup. So prior to this podcast, I went on a wheel generator, which basically, if you type in a list of names of people or things, and then you would spin it around and it lands on someone that automatically eliminates them from the competition. Well, I did that for both the AFC and the NFC, and I basically randomized the list of all the teams and the players. Well, not the players, but just the teams, and I just basically put them I paired them up basically by NFC and AFC, so like a Super Bowl matchup, and I then randomly, I put them in a list of the top 16 best Super Bowl matchups from worst to first. So I think once I go through my list, you kind of get an understanding of where I'm going to go. So basically, there are 32 teams. I paired them up into 16 pairs, and then I ranked them as far as what I think would be the best matchup and what I think would be the worst matchup. So if you guys are ready, here we go. Let's begin our countdown. We got 16 to go through. Number 16, I have the Arizona Cardinals and the Tennessee Titans. Now, the Tennessee Titans are in a very unique situation in that they lost Derrick Henry to free agency. They had lost A.J. Brown, and there is still some questions regarding Will Levis, whether or not he can develop into a great quarterback, because after all, he was a day 2 draft pick in last year's NFL draft. And there's some question as to if he can develop into someone that could be right up there with the current quarterback conversation, current quarterbacks of C.J. Stroud and, Caleb Williams. I know Caleb Williams is a rookie and all of that, but just somebody that can develop into that next tier of great quarterback. If he can, then the Titans, I think, would be a threat for the AFC, but there is a little bit of uncertainty down there. On the other hand, the Arizona Cardinals, they're still kind of a rebuilding team. Yes, they have Kyler Murray, and yes, they're trying to work around and trying to get some weapons for him, but he hasn't really developed into that quarterback that a lot of fans had expected him to be. And, the guy that won a Heisman Trophy at Oklahoma, there's definitely a lot of pressure. Arizona is in a very tough situation because they're playing in the same division as the 49ers and then the Los Angeles Rams as well. So I think that's going to be a hard thing for Arizona to get themselves to be among the best in the NFC. So that's why I have both the Cardinals and the Titans. They can develop, they can improve, but I just don't see that being the best matchup for this season. So those two are at number 16. At number 15, I have the Carolina Panthers against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Carolina did not have a great season last year as Bryce Young was not had some struggles, and a lot of people have already rated him as a bust and everything, but I don't think that's fair. I think you need to give him another year or two to kind of see if he can develop into the quarterback everyone wants, because a lot of times rookie quarterbacks, there have been great quarterbacks that had terrible rookie seasons. You think about Terry Bradshaw, you think about Troy Aikman, Peyton Manning. All three of those quarterbacks I mentioned, they're Hall of Famers and they're Super Bowl champions. So I'm not saying Bryce Young will be in that same category, but there's still a chance that he can develop into that great quarterback. And that's why Carolina has gone out of its way to add the pieces around them. They drafted Jonathan Brooks, a running back from the University of Texas, who looks to, help take some pressure off, even though he's a rookie for the Carolina Panthers. They also traded for wide receiver Deontay Johnson from the Steelers, so that would be one interesting storyline from that particular matchup. But Carolina, they did lose some notable players, mostly Brian Burns, who was traded to the New York Giants, and also Shaq Griffin, who signed a deal with the Minnesota Vikings, and tight end Hayden Hurst with the Chargers. So there's definitely some issues with Carolina trying to overcome the losses, but also trying to utilize the gains that they got in hoping to compete for what might be considered a questionable NFC South division. And I'll have more info on the other teams in just a moment. But then you have the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers made an interesting free agent signing when they acquired Russell Wilson, who had a disastrous stint with the Denver Broncos. But now, all of a sudden, they added quarterback Justin Fields from the Chicago Bears, and that's leading to people questioning whether or not there's going to be some quarterback controversies with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. Because, Wilson, he struggled, but there can be some times when he might be able to get back to what he was in Seattle. And then you had Justin Fields, who never really developed into that quarterback that he wanted to be with the Chicago Bears, henceforth why they traded him to Pittsburgh. So, I mean, that's the one position that is definitely going to be a question mark for Pittsburgh. But they did also add Patrick Queen from division rival Baltimore on their team. And it'll be very interesting for Pittsburgh if they can develop and contend in a division that is also featured with the Ravens and the Bengals. But the reason why I have the Steelers and the Panthers at number 15 is simply because while the Panthers might still be looking to form weapons with quarterback Bryce Young, there's question marks about Pittsburgh's quarterback play and whether or not Russell Wilson is the right fit. Pittsburgh's defense should continue to, well, I don't want to say they should continue to be a good defense, because even though they have TJ Watt, I sometimes think they are wasting his prime years. So, unfortunately, Pittsburgh, great historic franchise, but you're down low just because of some question marks alongside with Carolina. Coming in at 14, I have the New Orleans Saints and the New England Patriots. Now, this would have been a matchup that would definitely be a top 5, top 3 matchup years ago because of Drew Brees and Tom Brady at the quarterback positions. And then, of course, Alvin Kamara against Julian Edelman, even though they both play different positions. And then Rob Gronkowski against Michael Thomas. That would have been a great matchup. And we almost came close to that Super Bowl back in 2018. I know my co-host on Two Pals on a Pod does not like to think about that moment that much. But this year, it's kind of a different story. The reason why the Patriots and the Saints are down at 14, the Patriots are entering a new era. They don't have Bill Belichick. Mac Jones, who was supposed to be the heir apparent to Tom Brady, has since moved on to, I want to say, Pittsburgh. And now the Patriots are relying on a rookie quarterback in Drake May out of North Carolina. And Drake May, outside of probably, Caleb Williams to some people, was perhaps the best quarterback in this NFL draft. And that's going to be interesting to see if he can develop into a great quarterback for the Patriots, especially under new head coach Jared Mayo. The Patriots dynasty, it was a great dynasty, but now we're going to have to deal with a new era without both Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. And that's going to be, there's definitely going to be some question marks about that organization if they can somehow duplicate the success in years past. But on the other side, you have the New Orleans Saints who, again, they're not the same team. Their quarterback play has been spotty, even though they had Derek Carr. But they did make an interesting draft pick, getting Spencer Rattler from South Carolina. Now, Spencer Rattler, who has had an interesting trail to this point, former reality star quarterback who got in trouble in high school, goes to play football at Oklahoma, is expected to be a Heisman Trophy favorite, does not have a great year, gets replaced by Caleb Williams, and then he ends up transferring to South Carolina, where he hasn't really developed into that quarterback that he was hoping to be. But now he gets drafted by the Saints in the 4th round, and opportunity for him to learn under Derek Carr and everything. And I think this is a case where the Super Bowl matchup between the Saints and the Patriots is just a few years too late, and I don't know if it would have as much publicized or popularity as other matchups as well. Although I will say the one thing, though, that would make this Super Bowl matchup interesting is that it would take place in the Louisiana Superdome, and teams that have hosted Super Bowls and have played in those Super Bowls are 2-0, the Buccaneers and the Rams. So, I don't know. It could be a third thing for the New Orleans Saints if they can be able to duplicate what those two teams did previously. Number 13, the Cleveland Browns and the Seattle Seahawks. It's safe to say that for Cleveland, this is a make-or-break year for Deshaun Watson. I know Cleveland made the playoffs last year with multiple quarterbacks and everything, but for Deshaun Watson, let's put aside all the stuff that happened off the field. Let's put aside all those allegations, and let's just think about him as a quarterback. He has not really been what he was as a Texan. And unfortunately, that's what happens when you miss out on a year and then for personal reasons, and then you simply get suspended for 11 games. He has kind of shown some of that rust. Now, do I think he can get back to what he was? I don't think he will ever be the same quarterback that he was with the Texans. And that's why, unfortunately, I have him down there on the list. But, he does have some quality players with Amari Cooper being on there. And, Myles Garrett on the defensive side. I mean, this is a Cleveland Browns team that surprised everybody by making the playoffs, but again, they're in a very tight division with the Ravens and the Bengals and the Steelers, and that's always going to be one of the most competitive divisions out there. I just think it's hard for Cleveland to get themselves in that spotlight of getting to be one of the best teams in the AFC. Then you have Seattle. Same thing with the Patriots. They have a new coach at the helm, and unfortunately for Seattle, they're still in that tight division, much like the Cardinals that I talked about. But Seattle might be able to thrust themselves into being perhaps the second best team in the NFC West, as it's still the 49ers division, I feel, unless the Rams have something to say about that. But, Seattle feels like they have improved their offensive line to help quarterback Geno Smith, and they could be a sleeper team this upcoming season. But I think the toughest part with this matchup is with the Seahawks. There's just a lot of unknowns about that team and whether or not they can be able to overcome that. And I just don't know if they would have that star power to attract like they had been back in 2013 when they won their first Super Bowl. So I think this matchup with Seattle and Cleveland is just down there. With the Browns, it's just a case of, can Deshaun Watson stay healthy, and can he be the one to help lead the Browns over the helm? Or if not, then you have Jameis Winston as a backup quarterback. And then with the Seahawks, there's just a lot of question marks, even though Geno Smith has confidence that his team can really make some noise in the NFC West. So, but they're number 13 just because there's just some question marks. With number 12, you have the Denver Broncos and the Chicago Bears. Now, the Broncos got rid of Russell Wilson, and it was probably the right decision. However, they gave up a lot to acquire him in the first place, and that, unfortunately, is going to be a handicap for them over the next few years. Now, the Broncos did draft quarterback Bo Nix, who they hope can be the one to elevate themselves in the conversation of the AFC West division. But I just feel that Denver has put themselves in such a hole that it's going to take at least years before they can get themselves back up in a conversation to be a Super Bowl contending team. And especially when you have the Chiefs and the Chargers kind of running around at the division. And I'll probably put the Raiders up there as well. I just have a hard time seeing Denver get up there. The reason why they were paired up with the Bears by automatic circumstances is because the Chicago Bears, they seem to have a bright future. They drafted Caleb Williams, they drafted Roman Oduzune, or I don't know if I pronounced his name right, and I apologize again. But, the Bears have a team that could be on the bright side looking up. Now, Chicago, same situation as the, Broncos. The NFC North is a loaded division. Now, I think the Bears might have a chance to be better than the Minnesota Vikings, but I don't think they'll be better than the Packers, and I especially don't think they'll be better than the Lions this upcoming season. I think Caleb Williams will have a very good case to win Rookie of the Year, as he is probably expected to be the best quarterback out of this draft, pending, of course, he doesn't get injured or he doesn't have a bad season. But the thing with rookie quarterbacks is it depends on what system you're placed in. Are you going to be the great fit for Chicago? And I think for the Bears franchise that has had some issues with the quarterback position, that's probably the one thing about the Bears that has been a problem. They have never had a legitimate quarterback in their history, not since Slinging Sammy Ball, I mean, Jim McMahon, yeah, he won a Super Bowl with the Bears, but that was really Walter Payton's team, and they were led by a dominant defense that year in '85. But, you think about some of the other quarterbacks they had, Jay Cutler, Rex Grossman, like he went to a Super Bowl for crying out loud, and then Mitchell Trubisky, which you probably could have had Patrick Mahomes, Chicago, but that, unfortunately, did not happen. And I think the Bears might have found their answer at the quarterback position. But obviously they're number 12 with the Broncos, who might have a hard time getting to the Super Bowl, at least be competitive for the next few years. Coming in at number 11, I have the Jaguars and the Falcons. Now, the Jacksonville Jaguars were supposed to be the AFC South's best team last year. They were 8-3 after beating the Texans, and then all of a sudden they wound up losing at least 5 of their last 6 games, and they got eliminated from the playoff contention. So the Jaguars have some issues, and that's a team that they're going to have to figure out a way to contend for a loaded AFC South, which right now you can say that the Texans and the Colts are the 2 best teams in the AFC South. Trevor Lawrence, he might feel that his position as the best quarterback in the division could be on the line, as he doesn't have he has to watch out for C.J. Stroud. But Trevor Lawrence, of course, is 1-1 against Stroud in their career so far. And then when you look at the Jaguars' free agency, they did upgrade their defense, acquiring Eric Armstead from the San Francisco 49ers, and also acquiring wide receiver Gabe Davis from the Buffalo Bills. And that's another team that's going to have question marks in Buffalo. But Gabe Davis, a dependable wide receiver, certainly one that could help help make Trevor Lawrence an elite quarterback in this NFL. So there's definitely a little bit of questions and concerns about the Jaguars, and the reason why they are paired up with the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons had recently signed Kirk Cousins to free agency deal, and you're thinking, okay, Kirk Cousins is going to be the answer. He's going to be the quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons. All of a sudden, they selected Michael Penix Jr. from University of Washington, who just led the Huskies to a national championship berth. And everyone's like, what are you doing, Atlanta? You just signed a free agent deal with Kirk Cousins, and then you had Michael Penix Jr. Now, Atlanta says that it's for a succession plan for when Kirk Cousins, who might not be around for 4 years, decides, to give way to Michael Penix Jr., who's a quarterback. And I don't find any fault with that thinking, but I think the biggest problem here is, why would you draft a quarterback who is a guy that wants to play right now when you have a chance to maybe develop, when you already signed a guy in free agency? So I think there's some questions with Atlanta, and I think that's going to be a bit of an issue for them in the NFC South division. But, it's hard to really say. I think the Falcons and the Jaguars, to me, are two teams that have, are facing a very tight battle, especially being in the competitive divisions that they're in. Now we go to the top 10, and this one I think would be ideal as far as the marketing aspect of this matchup, but I have the New York Giants and the Miami Dolphins. Now, the Miami Dolphins have one of the best offenses in the NFL, and they kind of got better when they acquired Odell Beckham Jr., who hasn't really been the same receiver as he was with the Giants or the Rams, but he can really help out, make the Miami Dolphins a major threat in the AFC East, let alone the AFC. Tua Tagovailoa, expecting to put up some good numbers. He had a great turnaround season last year, leading Miami to the playoffs, where unfortunately they realized they couldn't play in cold weather against Kansas City. But I think the Dolphins are that sleeper team in the AFC that people should watch out for, especially if you're like teams like the Buffalo Bills, who you had some really tough battles with them the last few years. So it should be interesting to watch. But Miami is paired up with the New York Giants, and the Giants, they got a receiver for Daniel Jones, which is pretty interesting if you ask me, because there was a lot of talk about the Giants possibly taking a quarterback replacing Daniel Jones, who hasn't really had developed himself into Eli Manning status, if you will. Not that he was ever going to get there, but I think a lot of Giants fans wanted another quarterback. They could have had Bo Nix. They could have had J.J. McCarthy. Instead, they take Malik Neighbors out of LSU, which does kind of help giving Daniel Jones a weapon, but it almost makes it seem like Daniel Jones is in a hot seat. If you don't step up and if you don't play, guess what? You're not only going to be on the team next year, there's a good chance you might not even be in the NFL, and it's not because you're not, good enough. You just, you haven't earned your stripes yet. So a lot of pressure. But this matchup is in the top 10 because I think from a media hype standpoint, anytime there's a team in New York that is, in the championship or so, they're going to hype it up no matter what. And with Miami, that's an ideal, interesting matchup to have a quarterback like Tua Tagovailoa playing with the Dolphins and who are looking to upgrade themselves to being one of the best teams in the AFC. I think from a media standpoint, you're going to get a lot of hype. You're going to get a lot of interest and excitement. Maybe not as much as if it was Kansas City or so in the Super Bowl, but Miami and New York, that would be a really good matchup for this case. But that's because they're number 10. Number 9, you have the Los Angeles Rams and the Indianapolis Colts. Now, the Colts came within one drop pass of making the playoffs last year. And because of that, they lost to the Texans and were eliminated. But with Indianapolis, they're definitely going to be a tough team to watch out for. They have a great defense and linebacker Zaire Franklin. Running back Jonathan Taylor, I know there's been talks about him wanting out of Indianapolis or so, but the biggest question mark is the health of quarterback Anthony Richardson. Now, Richardson, he had a good start to his 4 games, but he has not quite proven himself to be well, I say he hasn't proven himself. He has yet to really show everyone that he's fully capable of being an NFL quarterback. And I know a lot of Colts fans will say, well, he had a better game than CJ Stroud the first time they played. Well, he got hurt that game. Okay, first of all, the Texans were a young team. They were developing on the offensive side. And besides, the game wasn't over. Stroud could have come back and won that game, but it just didn't happen. And let's be realistic. By the time y'all played them the second time, the Texans were a better team than they were when you first played them. So there is question marks with Anthony Richardson and whether or not he can be, in the same category as C.J. Stroud. What is an interesting case is that they would be paired up with the Los Angeles Rams, who still have Matthew Stafford, still leading the Rams at the quarterback position, but they also had some great performances, most notably with Puka Nacua, who, aside from C.J. Stroud, was the best rookie out there in all of the NFL. And, he's certainly a weapon to look out for the Los Angeles Rams. And I think the Rams are always going to be in the hunt for the NFC West division, certainly with the 49ers being on the lookout for them as well. But I think this is a very interesting matchup because, once again, it's the Rams, Los Angeles, big media city. And the Rams would certainly want to tack on to the great revival of a career that Matthew Stafford had. For most of his career, he struggled to win a Super Bowl, or let alone get to the playoffs with the Detroit Lions. And, he finally goes to the Rams, and he does win a Super Bowl. So that would be an interesting matchup. But the Rams and the Colts, not quite the ideal matchup for most fans, but just because of the media hype and everything, they would definitely be right up there at number 9. And number 8, I have the Green Bay Packers and the Las Vegas Raiders. The Green Bay Packers are one of the most up-and-coming teams with a franchise quarterback in Jordan Love. And, the Packers, with that big upset win over the Cowboys in the playoffs, they had a big win in Kansas City during the regular season. And I just think and they were also, let's not forget, they were ahead in the fourth quarter against their San Francisco 49ers before the Niners came back to win that game. So they really were a franchise that had they're a franchise that people can see being up and coming. Now, I think the question is, can they be able to overcome the Detroit Lions, who right now run the NFC North, which is something that you never heard of in your entire life. But I think Green Bay will be a team to look out for. And then the Vegas Raiders with Gardner Minshew, the quarterback, and then Antonio Pierce as the new head coach. The Raiders had a very difficult season last year, difficult start. Josh McDaniels was the head coach, but ultimately he got fired, and then Antonio Pierce was named interim head coach, and he got the Raiders back into a position where they could have made the playoffs, but they just came up short. And he earned the respect, and he got the job. So he's now the head coach, and I think there's going to be some question marks as far as what he can bring to the Raiders in the full season. And certainly, Las Vegas being in the same division with the Chargers and the Chiefs is going to be a very tough uphill climb. But, they have a great defense in Max Crosby leading the way. They added tight end Brock Bowers in the NFL draft from the University of Georgia. And they also got Christian Wilkins on a 4-year deal after he spent time with the Miami Dolphins. So the Raiders are going to be a sleeper team in my mind in the AFC West Division. But I have a hard time seeing them get by the Kansas City Chiefs. Maybe the Chargers, but it's going to be very difficult for the Raiders to get far. I can see the Packers make it a Super Bowl, but the Raiders, that would be very difficult. That's why they're at number 8. Number 7, and this was kind of surprising when I had this random wheel generator thing, but I have the Kansas City Chiefs and the Washington Commanders. Anytime the Kansas City Chiefs right now are in the Super Bowl, there's going to be a lot of attention on them. They're going to make this game interesting. There's going to be a lot of hype, and especially for this year, because they are looking to become the first team in NFL history to three-peat. But when you expect them to do that, you expect them to go up against a really talented team, like the Philadelphia Eagles, or maybe the Dallas Cowboys, or, like another strong NFC team. The 49ers again, I mean, they could do that. I mean, it could get against a really good team. But to do that against the Washington Commanders, that would almost seem like a formality. And Washington is in a very unique situation, considering that they had just drafted Jaden Daniels, Heisman Trophy winner out of LSU. No rookie quarterback in the history of the NFL has led their team to the Super Bowl. And, Jaden Daniels has openly said that he is hoping to duplicate C.J. Stroud's rookie season and more, which I like his confidence, but it's going to be hard to do considering everything that, Stroud did last year, which was unbelievable. But I think the Commanders will have a very difficult time getting out of the NFC East, at least for this year, considering that it's still the Cowboys and the Eagles in that division. But the Chiefs, I think, they're going to have some tough challenges as well. But I think with the weapons that they got and the players that they still have, the Mahomes, the Kelseys, the Christian Jones, and the new wide receiver and Xavier Worthy, who is expected to make a great contribution to the team even as a rookie, I think the Chiefs are the team to beat in the AFC West and the AFC, even though I put them at number 7 just because the matchups above them would make more sense from a hype perspective. It's not that Kansas City won't make the game as hyped up, but I think the way they would look at Kansas City versus Washington, it would be a formality that Kansas City would win their 3rd straight Super Bowl. And I don't think that would be right for a Super Bowl game. Number 6, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Buffalo Bills. Now, Tampa Bay last year had a really interesting turnaround because it looked like for a while that they were going to miss the playoffs. But then Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans turned it up. And before you know it, the Buccaneers make the playoffs. They win the game against the Eagles. And, they come close to knocking off the Detroit Lions. But Tampa Bay, I have a hard time picking out a division winner. I would say Tampa Bay for the time being would be the team I think would win the division. But you think about the situation, you just think about what's going on with the rest of that division, with all the new teams getting accustomed to their new roles, or they're trying to form weapons to help their quarterback play. That's something that is going to be interesting to watch, but I think Tampa Bay could be the team to watch out for in the NFC, and I think they're the sleeper team as well. I don't think anybody would expect Tampa Bay to make a run in the NFC Championship game, but they could surprise a lot of people. But to help them be a hyped-up Super Bowl caliber team in a Super Bowl that needs a lot of hype, they got assigned to the Buffalo Bills. And for Buffalo fans, this would be a great way to forget about the past struggles. Not only losing to the Kansas City Chiefs, getting outplayed by them in the NFL draft, and then losing your top 2 wide receivers in Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of questions about the Bills. Can they be able to get themselves to the Super Bowl? Has their window closed? They had 4 good years where they had a chance to get to the Super Bowl, and they've only appeared in 1 AFC Championship game. And, you feel bad for the guys there, but there's just a lot of questions. Questions at the head coach, questions about the quarterback. What are the Bills going to do? I mean, they did draft a wide receiver in Keon Coleman in this NFL draft, but I don't know. I'm having a hard time thinking that Buffalo could still have one more chance to reach the Super Bowl and potentially win it for that community. I mean, that city, that fan base has suffered through a lot, and you would think that they would have gotten a reward out of it, but no, they're being punished more. But I do like the Bills and the Buccaneers being a highly matchup. I struggled not to put them in the top 5 just because of the matchups ahead. So, here we go with the top 5. I have the New York Jets and the Detroit Lions. And this is a surprising one because the Jets still have Aaron Rodgers, who has yet to play a full season with the Jets. He only lasted 4 snaps. And the Jets, they got rid of Zach Wilson and everything, and now you're thinking, okay, Aaron Rodgers is still the guy. The question is he going to be able to be the man to lead the New York Jets to their first Super Bowl since Joe Namath back in Super Bowl III in '68? I mean, Aaron Rodgers is getting up there in age, and he has not been able to duplicate the success that he had when he was with the Packers in the last few seasons. And it's going to be hard to say, but the Jets could be a threat in the AFC East division. I mean, sure, you still got Sauce Gardner, but, Sauce Gardner hasn't really been that strong cornerback. I mean, I was surprised he actually made the Pro Bowl because I thought, personally, Derek Stingley Jr., who was picked before him, had a better season last year than Sauce did, but I mean, there's still a chance that Sauce Gardner can still win that argument. But I just think if you're the New York Jets, there are some question marks on that franchise, but they could be a sleeper team if Aaron Rodgers is able to get hot and be that quarterback that he was with the weapons that he has. Then you have the Detroit Lions, who were one half away from reaching the Super Bowl, their first Super Bowl in franchise history. They blew a 24-7 lead, and I'm going to be honest. The one thing that concerns me about Detroit is how are you going to be able to overcome a collapse like that? I mean, that's hard. How can you overcome such a massive collapse in a conference championship game? Well, some teams have done that, like the Patriots. The previous year they lose to the Colts, but then they came back to make the Super Bowl. But, the Detroit Lions are a team to watch out for in the NFC North, and I think they would certainly be America's team if they were to get into the Super Bowl, ideally maybe against the Kansas City Chiefs. But we got them going up against the Jets, and I think they would certainly be America's team regardless of who they face in the AFC because of their history of not being able to win since 1950. I want to say 55 was their last championship. I'll have to double check on that. But the Detroit Lions with Jared Goff, who has had a great turnaround after some decent struggles with the Rams. And, I just think the Detroit Lions are in a situation where now they have an opportunity to reach the Super Bowl, but you're going to have to overcome the strong teams of the 49ers and the Eagles to get there. And then also with the Cowboys and possibly with the Packers, depending on if they're able to elevate themselves. Number 4, it's an all-purple matchup. I have the Minnesota Vikings and the Baltimore Ravens. On one hand, you have the Minnesota Vikings, who apparently have drafted a replacement for Kirk Cousins, who got the Vikings on a decent run to the playoffs a couple years ago, but they haven't been able to get back to that format since. And now Minnesota is relying on J.J. McCarthy, a national championship quarterback from Michigan, who has to throw the ball to Justin Jefferson, who is a tremendous target. And Minnesota, I think they're going to be an interesting team to watch out for. I mean, I feel like with the NFC North, it's going to be the Bears and the Vikings that are going to be seen as the teams that are going to be sleepers to the teams that could push the other two teams into contention. But then it just hit me that they also had Sam Darnold, who had played quarterback for the New York Jets and was also with Washington for a period there. So that's going to be interesting to watch from the Vikings' perspective. It's another quarterback situation. I think they're going to look at Sam Darnold to be the starter and have J.J. McCarthy learn from him as well. But I just don't know if that's going to really help them out. And then, I think Minnesota is still trying to find itself and find its identity. Of course, Kevin O'Connell, the head coach of the Vikings, would like nothing more than to give Minnesota fans an opportunity to win their Super Bowl. In fact, it's so crazy how there are like 11 teams that have yet to win a Super Bowl, and Minnesota has appeared in 4 of those games, but they have not won, and they haven't been to the Super Bowl since 1976. So tough break for Minnesota as well, especially with their other sports teams going on. But I think Minnesota would make a good matchup in the NFC, especially for the Baltimore Ravens. Now, last year the Ravens were the AFC Championship game, and they were expected to win against the Kansas City Chiefs. And I thought after they beat the Texans that they were going to win the Super Bowl. Nope. Lamar Jackson found a way to not live up to his MVP caliber season. And I think if you're a Ravens fan, you have to be sick to your stomach, because the Ravens always put together some really good teams. You have a good quarterback in Lamar Jackson. You're fortunate to re-sign him, but he hasn't been able to develop into that quarterback. And I think he's the quarterback that has the most to lose. I think between him and Dak Prescott, they're the 2 quarterbacks that have the most pressure to win a Super Bowl. Because if they don't, then we're putting them in the same category as Dan Marino and Jim Kelly, and I'll throw Donovan McNabb in there for a time. But it's just unfortunate that we have to be looking at Lamar Jackson and what he's been able to do the last few seasons, and yet for him not to get to the Super Bowl is disappointing. I think the Ravens are going to be a strong team in that sense, and I think they would definitely be something to look out for. So I would not be surprised if Baltimore does make the Super Bowl this year, if it's not Kansas City, but that would probably be a win for them. I think it would be a case of Lamar Jackson wanting to win his first Super Bowl against the Minnesota Vikings, who are also wanting to win their first Super Bowl. So that's why they're number 4. At number 3, I have the Los Angeles Chargers and the San Francisco 49ers. Now, this would be a great matchup. The 49ers looking to redeem themselves after losing their last 3 Super Bowl appearances, once to the Baltimore Ravens when head coach Jim Harbaugh, who is now the head coach of the Chargers, was there, and then the last 2 to the Kansas City Chiefs. So the 49ers right now are under that pressure of being the Buffalo Bills of this era, which is kind of weird and bizarre because they were a dynasty during the 1980s, but it's a different era now if you're a San Francisco 49ers fan. But the 49ers would certainly, look to still be the best team in the NFC, although Kyle Shanahan has to, figure out a way not to screw things up. But then, of course, you have the Chargers, who are looking to make some noise after they hired Jim Harbaugh from Michigan, who was looking to help develop Justin Herbert into that quarterback that everybody expected him to be from last year or the season before. And, the Chargers are a legitimate threat to the AFC West. I think it's going to be them that might be the best team outside the Kansas City Chiefs that does win the AFC West. And I think I could see them making the playoffs for sure. But, I think Jim Harbaugh is getting another opportunity to coach an NFL team, looking to make the most of this opportunity this time. And he's doing it with a franchise that, has to feel uplifted and spirited and everything to want to get to the Super Bowl and win. So I think Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers would make this Super Bowl matchup interesting. And of course, it would be like John Gruden having to face his old team in the Super Bowl. And we know John Gruden won that match. And then also another case, Dan Reeves going up against his former team when he was coaching the Falcons, and he went up against the Broncos, and that didn't work out well. So it would be another similar situation in that regard for Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers, who would go up against the 49ers in this hypothetical Super Bowl matchup. So now we're down to 2 matchups, and number 2, the Cincinnati Bengals and the Philadelphia Eagles. So, the Cincinnati Bengals have been the Chiefs' kryptonite, at least for the last few seasons. But Joe Burrow missed most of last year, or missed the rest of the season due to an injury. And unfortunately, the Bengals were never the same team, even though they had Jake Browning get them as close to making the playoffs as possible. But you have to wonder, are the Bengals still going to be that same team? Because you got to remember, they lost Tyler Boyd. They lost Joe Mixon. There's also talk about a couple of players wanting to get traded from the team. Some valuable pieces of that Bengals team wanting to get traded. And unfortunately, the Bengals are in a very tight situation. Like, how long can they be a competitor in the AFC? Because they've had their chance to go up against the Chiefs, and they've beaten them once, but Kansas City got the better of them. Can they remind Kansas City that they're still their rivals? That's hard to say, considering that we missed out on some great football between Burrow and Mahomes last year. But I think it'll be interesting to watch for this upcoming season. And as far as the Philadelphia Eagles are concerned, they're still one of the top 2 NFC teams in my mind. They still have Jalen Hurts, obviously the quarterback, who was a guy that I really thought should have won the MVP the year that Mahomes won his second, but it is what it is. But they added Saquon Barkley, who was one of the top free agents. In fact, he was the top free agent going into this offseason, and he ends up deciding to join a division rival after his time with the New York Giants. So A.J. Brown, of course, is still there. I think the Philadelphia Eagles had it was a bit of a Super Bowl hangover. Like when you lose a Super Bowl, you kind of struggle to get back there. I think that's what happened with Philadelphia. I think they're going to bounce back, and I think they're going to be okay as far as this upcoming season. But I think Philadelphia and Cincinnati would be the second best matchup, considering the fact that you have the arguably one of the best NFC teams and an AFC team trying to get themselves back to reaching the Super Bowl level. I think the Eagles and the Bengals would be the second best matchup in all of this Super Bowl list. Which brings me to number one. And folks, I kid you not, I was not expecting this matchup to happen. I was thinking it was not going to be a possibility. I did not even think that it was going to happen. It was just a random wheel generator. I kid you not, this was not biased. This was not rigged. I swear to you, it was not rigged. But it's the mother of all Super Bowl matchups. An all-Texas Super Bowl. His will be done. The Dallas Cowboys and the Houston Texans coming in as the number one Super Bowl matchup that I ranked out of the random generator for the wheel thing that I just did. I don't know if there's any argument about this one, because there's currently an argument going on who's the best team in Texas. It's Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys, CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans. Okay, so the Cowboys are a bigger brand, and rightfully so, but this offseason, Jerry Jones said that the Cowboys were going to go all in. Was that all talk? Because apparently I didn't see any splashes. I didn't see the Cowboys make any big moves and everything. But, and it's making people wonder, are the Cowboys really serious? Because right now the Cowboys should no longer be considered America's team. You can talk about it all you want, but at the end of the day, you are no longer America's team because you haven't been to a Super Bowl since 1995. You haven't even been to an NFC Championship game since that year. You are considered a joke of a franchise if you keep bragging about being America's team and you don't even make it to the NFC Championship game, let alone the Super Bowl. But then on the other hand, you have CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans, who had one of the biggest turnarounds last year. They're adding all these pieces in the offseason. They're expected to be at least a top 5 offense for this upcoming franchise. A team that can really contend for the Super Bowl this year. And if not, they don't get there this year, then you know what? There's always next year and the year after. Because the window of opportunity, as long as CJ Stroud is the quarterback, is right there right now. And you've seen all the back and forth jabs between C.J. Stroud and Micah Parsons. They're friends, but it's a bit of an entertainment show. But you know what, folks? I think this is the ultimate matchup. Houston versus Dallas, the biggest rivalry in the state of Texas. This matchup would be better than the playoff matchups that the Rockets and Mavericks were in, or the recent ALCS between the Rangers and the Astros would be in. This would be the biggest matchup in the history of the state of Texas. The Houston Texans and the Dallas Cowboys in the Super Bowl. And an opportunity for Houston to show Dallas that there is 2 heavyweight teams, sports towns, in the Lone Star State. It's not just Dallas. Now, I know Dallas is feeling on such a high because both the Mavericks and the Stars are currently winning their series and everything, and they're making playoff runs. And I know the Rangers just won the World Series last year, but you know what? It's an opportunity for Houston to get revenge, because this would be the big marquee matchup. This is the matchup everyone, I think, would like to see. Even if you're not a diehard Texas fanatic, you would certainly want to see either the Cowboys shut the Texans up, or you want to see the Texans kick the living bejeevers out of the Cowboys up. And folks, I'm telling you what, this would be the ultimate big sporting event, and it would be huge if the Texans beat the Cowboys. Now, they're going to play each other in the regular season. I only wish it was a Thanksgiving Day game, because that would have been much better. But unfortunately, it's the week before Thanksgiving, which is unfair because, come on, you got to put the Texans and the Cowboys in Thanksgiving. It's almost like you're basically putting these matchups for the Cowboys to play, so that gives them a better chance of winning. Why not have a Thanksgiving Day game between the Texans and the Cowboys? Instead, you got the Cowboys in, I don't know, was it the Giants or so? I'll have to double check the schedule, but come on. This is the matchup that I think a lot of people want to see, especially with what's been going on in the offseason. The Cowboys talk the talk. they don't walk the walk. The Texans, they didn't need to say, we're going to go all in. Actions spoke louder than words for the Texans. Now, obviously, Houston's going to have an interesting dynamic because you have the Chiefs, you have the Ravens, you have the Bengals, and obviously you have the Bills. But I think the Texans could really make some noise here. And I think the Texans are likely the team outside of the Chiefs and maybe the Ravens that are going to get to the Super Bowl this year. The Cowboys, they're going to have some tough hills to climb, considering that they're playing with the Eagles and then they have to get by the 49ers if that matchup ever were to proceed, and that hasn't worked out well for them. But I think the matchup between the Texans and the Cowboys would definitely be the best matchup possible out of all the 16 matchups based on the randomness that I had selected. And I'll say this. For all you Dallas fans that are right there, you might want this matchup as well. Considering that you are currently one win away from appearing to the NBA Finals, I'm going to make this real clear. You might tie the Rockets in the NBA Finals, but you ain't going to pass them. You might have another Stanley Cup, but you know what? There's going to come a point when Houston's going to get an NHL team. And when that happens, get ready. And folks, let's remember, just because you won the whole thing last year in baseball, you have never been the dynasty that the Astros were. And yes, they are a dynasty. But even with all the sporting accomplishments, the Cowboys and the Texans would be the best marquee matchup in a Super Bowl in the Lone Star State. I think it needs to happen. I think it should happen. I think the Texans are going to get there in the near future. The question is, will the Cowboys get there? Who knows? But that is my top 16 list. So going over that list one more time. Number 16, the Arizona Cardinals and the Tennessee Titans. Number 15, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Carolina Panthers. Number 14, the New Orleans Saints versus the New England Patriots. Number 13, the Cleveland Browns versus the Seattle Seahawks. Number 12, the Denver Broncos versus the Chicago Bears. Number 11, the Jacksonville Jaguars versus the Atlanta Falcons. Number 10, the New York Giants versus the Miami Dolphins. Number 9, the Los Angeles Rams versus the Indianapolis Colts. Number 8, the Green Bay Packers versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Number 7, the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Washington Commanders. Number 6, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Buffalo Bills. Number 5, the New York Jets versus the Detroit Lions. Number 4, the Minnesota Vikings versus the Baltimore Ravens. Number 3, the Los Angeles Chargers versus the San Francisco 49ers. Number 2, the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Philadelphia Eagles. And number 1, the Dallas Cowboys and the Houston Texans. That is my top 16 randomizer list as far as best Super Bowl matchups that we would like to see for this upcoming season. So I cannot wait for the NFL season to come around. And folks, let's be real. It is football season, even though our first game isn't until September. So that is my thoughts for this Super Bowl, or for this segment as well. And before we conclude the show, I'm going to give a special congratulations to head coach Janae Shirley and the East Texas Baptist University softball team. Going back to my Division III days when I was the assistant sports information director there, the softball team was one of the teams that always got so close to getting there, but they just never could get over the hump. I guess it finally took me leaving for y'all to go to get to the World Series. No, I'm just kidding. Y'all had some good teams. It just didn't work out. But hey, at the end of the day, it is what it is. Congratulations to the ETBU softball team. Y'all deserve it. I wish you all the best of luck in hopes to bring in a national championship. And that is going to do it for this episode of Crocking, Locking, and Dropping. And as always, folks, you can listen in to my YouTube channel at KW Klein 91, or you can listen to Spotify and on Podbean as we have this episode coming out both visually and audioly. If there ever was a word called audioly, then let me know in the dictionary. Until next time, this is Kenneth the K-Rock Klein saying goodbye, so long, and as always, I'm taking Houston over Dallas at the end of the day, and I can't wait for the Stros to beat the Rangers in the next playoff series when that happens. And it will happen. And the Stros will get a World Series ring number 3. The Rockets will get NBA Finals Championship number 3. And I bet your bottom dollar the Texans will get their first Super Bowl. Come on, folks. Anyways, folks, I will see you guys next time on this podcast of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock.